Hi there, welcome back to Creative Quilting the K-Way. We're back for episode 6. In this episode we're going to cut an entire quilt project for a pattern called Goddess of Light. We visited this one before. We selected fabrics for it in an earlier episode. This time we're actually going to cut everything out that we need for this particular quilt. This is a great quilt for a beginner quilter. Awesome, nice big pieces. We do a little bit of angle cutting. Most of it is just straight cutting and goes together with 3 easy fabrics and a zinger. So we're going to try and cut that whole project out today. So to start with, I've got some strips to show you, some pieces to show you, and then I'll back up and show you how I did it. When we read a pattern, we always have information there and we have to kind of discern what it means. So when we look at fabric needed, it's going to tell us fabrics A, B, and C in this particular instance. And then it's going to also tell us our zinger or other things. When we go to our cutting list, this particular pattern and many patterns are going to give you a number of sizes. This particular pattern gives you sizes for a queen size quilt, a double quilt, a twin, and a crib size. Because there are so many sizes there, we have to pay attention to things in the directions and pay attention to the order the numbers appear. So in this one, it says cutting the crib size measurements will appear first. So as I look at this, I might want to mark on my pattern how many things I need to cut of each piece. So that tells me from fabric A, I need to cut 2 18 5/8 inch squares. So that's what I have right here first. 18 5 inch squares. Now, how did I cut those? If you remember from last episode, we learned how to cut using the measurements on the cutting board. That's what you need to do to cut these really big squares. These are my 2 finished ones, but to get those, I had my yard goods, open them up, and lay them on my cutting mat. Now I need to use the lines on the cutting mat in order to cut these 2 squares. So as I look at it, I'm going to line up a folded edge, a straight edge, on a line on my mat. And then I have to pick some lines on my cutting mat that are easy to look at. So if I pull this way over to the side, off a little bit, line up my folded edge on the bottom here, smooth out my fabric. I need 18 5/8. Now I've pulled this fabric over a little bit so that if I were to cut it on that 0 line, I would have the edge that I need. So I'm going to go right to the actual 18 5/8 mark. So I'm at 18 and then 5/8. So if I go to 18 5/8, I'm going right across there. There's my half, there's my 5/8. I'm going to do it at the top and I'm going to do it down at the bottom. 18 5/8. Use my rotary cutter and make that cut. Now I need to cut the other edge of this. So I'll spin it around, line it up to the 0 line once again. Go to my 18 5/8. There's my 18, there's my half, 1 past is 5/8. And make my cut. Now I need to square these up. So I'll rotate them again. This time I'm going to line up the cut edge with a line on my mat. And I'm just going to get a true edge right here. I'm going to use this 25 because it's easy to see on this side. And just get my squared edge. Now I'm going to take it back, and for ease, so I don't mess up, I'm going to take it back to the 0 line again. Line it up with the 0 line. Line up my cut edge along a line on the mat as well. Move that down a little so you can see it better. Lining it right up with that line. Then I'm going to go to 18 5/8 again. Now I've got my 2 squares 18 and 5/8. Using the mat to cut, not the ruler. So that's the first thing on my list. The second thing on my list, oh, before I do that though, why don't I do my subcut? So it says on here, cut 2 18 and 5/8 inch squares. Cut diagonally twice to make 8 quarter squares. So we learned in the last episode how to make quarter square cuts on a square fabric to end up with 4 pieces. That's what we need to do with these 2 squares that we have cut. We need to make 8 of them. I need to cut from corner to corner. I can do that in a couple of ways. So I could lay it on my mat nice and straight, put my ruler on there, making sure I have the angle right. Now I can't quite reach it to the bottom. I could just grab another ruler and line it up right there to make sure that I am cutting nice and true from corner to corner. That would be one way to do it. I could also, if I feel confident about my square, I could fold it this way, line up all the edges, then use the line on my ruler for my 45 degree along the edge, and line it up on the bottom, making sure that I'm staying square down on the bottom as well. And if I look at that point and this point there, if those things all line up, I can feel confident going ahead and making that cut. Now I'll be able to open these up, and I need to make this cut next. Because I have a nice sharp rotary blade, I can go ahead and layer these if I want and make the cut all at the same time. And they lined up just right. So then I take my ruler, use my 45 degree line again, go from the point down, making sure that I line up on the bottom edge as well, so that I'm staying nice and square and true. Now I have 8 of these triangles that I need for this quilt. So that's the first part of the cutting. And then I need to cut 2 10 7/8 inch squares. That's what I need to do next. So let's go back to our yard goods. This time, 10 7/8 isn't quite as big. Now I could use the measurements on the mat for that if I choose to, or I might have a ruler that's big enough. And I happen to have one that's a 15 inch square. So for these 2 squares, what I'm going to do, instead of using the mat, is I'm going to use this ruler to cut those. So just to review, those are 10 7/8. So if I line up my edge, this edge is a true cut edge that I cut just a couple minutes ago. So I know that's straight and square. I'm going to line up my 7/8 right on that edge. I'm going to pull this down so I'm down at about 11, because I'm going to have to square that up, trim that off in just a minute. But I'm going to go to 10 7/8 on this edge, and I'm going to be able to cut this side and this side at the same time, laying the ruler here just once. So I'll be able to cut up this side and then turn and go across that side. So now I have 1, 2, 3 edges that are ready. I just need to rotate it so that I can cut off this edge. Line it up at my 10 7/8, double checking to make sure I'm 10 7/8 down here, which I am, and I'm ready just to cut the one last side. So the directions say for that one, cut 2 10 7/8 inch squares, then cut once diagonally to make 4 corners. We did that in the last episode as well. So all we need to do is line up our 45 degree line and cut corner to corner. I don't quite make it down on the bottom, so I'm going to switch to my long ruler so I get a more accurate cut. line up my 45-degree angle from the corner, going down to the bottom corner, making my cut. Now I have the 4 corner triangles that I need for the quilt, and I'll set those to the side. I'm still on fabric A, so I'm still cutting from that main dark fabric. The next thing I need, it says for lengthwise grain borders only. The quilt that I'm making is the baby size one, and there aren't even any borders, so we don't need to worry about that. So we bypass that step. Then we go to cut 4 4.5 inch strips. I already cut those for us. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and my 4th strip I already cut, but it also tells me in my directions, cut 1 strip in half, making 2 21 by 4.5. So I've done that for us as well. So the last strip that I cut it in half right down the fold. Then it says cut 1 2.5 inch strip. We know how to cut straight strips, so I did that for us as well. That's my 2.5 inch strip. Now it says for cross grain borders, I don't need to worry about that because this quilt doesn't have any borders. I'm done with fabric A. So I can set my cut pieces to the side, get rid of the rest of those yard goods for the darkest fabric, and get ready for my next fabric, which is B. My B fabric is my medium fabric. And it says for this one, I need to cut 4 4.5 inch strips. So let's review how we cut strips. I take my yard goods, get my selvages together, put my fingers through in between there so that I can shimmy and make sure they stay nice and straight on the bottom. Lay it down on my mat, bring the edges up, making sure they match all the way across, nice and straight. And I need 4.5 inch strips. I need to cut this left edge, but remember we don't like to cut backwards, so we're going to allow a little extra there. Cut our first strip a little bigger so we can come back and square it up. So 4.5 inches, I'm lining up the top of my ruler up on the top, making sure I stay square, lining up the bottom of the ruler with the folded edge, making my first cut. And I need 4 of these. There's 1, 2, 3, and this is a little messy right here, so I'm going to pick this back up and make sure that I'm staying square on that one. Pick it back up, make sure the bottom is staying smooth, and lay it back down. And I can see that I have a crease there, so it's a good thing that I did that. Much better. Line up the top edges so that they stay square. This edge I can see I'm going to need to clean up again, so I'm going to cut a little generous on the first cut here so I can trim it up, lining up the bottom and the top, staying square, and then go 4.5. Straighten up that side. And I still have the first strip that I need to straighten up as well. Then I need to make this cut right here to clean that edge up. That was my 4 4.5 inch strips. Now it also says cut 1 strip in half, making 2 strips out of it. So I just need to cut along this fold. I'll get my gorgeous Kai scissors, stitch right across, or snip right across there. And now I've got 2 half strips of my medium fabric. Let's see if we need to cut anything else from B. That's all we need to cut from B, so I'm done with that fabric. The next fabric is my light. It's not as big of a value change as some choices we make, but the excitement of this geometric print is going to look really great in this quilt.